This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
Your hosts are Seth Jacobson
and Patrick Hylo.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick.
In any case, we did come here today to talk about Chapter 54 of the Fires of Heaven, to Caemlyn, and our symbol is the dragon banner.
Do you want to talk about the map that is right before this chapter? It's got a detailed city map of Caemlyn.
Yeah, because at the end of Rand's POV here, the battle for the palace is just beginning. And
one of the things that I always really like about Caemlyn is it's actually in the shape of a human heart. Like, not the stylized heart, but it actually like a 4-chamber heart.
Oh. I didn't know that.
Caemlyn is the heart of... kind of looks like a jeweled heart to me, but yeah, it's the crown jewel of the... and the heart of the city. And a bit of a rose theme to it. It's sort of... yeah, I really like the way there's the rose, heart, jewel all sort of come together in the Caemlyn city layout.
500 of the maidens behind Sulin accompanied Rand back to the royal palace, where Bael waited in the great court, inside the front gates with Thunderwalkers, and Black Eyes, and Water Seekers, and men from every other society, their numbers filling the courtyard, and crowding back into the palace, through every door, down to the smallest servant's way. Some watched from lower windows, waiting their turn to come out. The surrounding stone balconies were empty. In the entire courtyard, only one man waited who was not Aiel. Terrans and Caerienin, especially Caerienin, stayed clear when Aiel gathered. The exception stood above Bael on the wide grey steps leading into the palace. Pevin, with the crimson banner hanging limply from its staff, and no more expression surrounded by Aiel than at any other time. Aviendha, behind Rand's saddle, clung tightly to him, breast pressed against his back, until the very moment he dismounted. There had been an exchange between her and some of the wise ones back at the docks that he did not think he had been supposed to hear. "Go with the light," Amis had said, touching Aviendha's face, "and guard him closely. You know how much depends on him." "Much depends on you both," Bear told Aviendha, almost at the same time that Melaine said irritably, "It would be easier if you had succeeded by now." Soraleia snorted. "Even maidens knew how to handle men in my day." "She has been more successful than you know," Amis told them. Aviendha shook her head. The roses and thorns ivory bracelet slid down on her arm as she raised a hand to forestall the other woman, but Amis went on over her, half-formed protests. "I have waited for her to tell us, but since she will not—" She saw him then, standing only 10 feet away, with Jayadin's reins in his hand, and cut off sharply. Aviendha turned to see what Amis was staring at, when her eyes found him. Bright crimson suffused her face, then drained away so suddenly that even her sun-dark cheeks looked pale. The 4 wise ones fixed him, with flat, unreadable gazes. Moghedien and Mat came up behind him, leading their horses. Do women learn that look in the cradle?" Mat muttered. "Do their mothers teach them? I'd say the mighty Karakarn will get his ears singed if he stays around here much longer." Shaking his head, Rand reached up as Aviendha swung a leg over to slide down, and lifted her from the dapple's back. For a moment, he held her by the waist, looking down into her clear blue-green eyes. She did not look away. Her expression never changed, but her hands tightened slowly on his forearms. What success was she supposed to have? He had thought she was set to spy on him for the Wise Ones, but if she ever asked a question about things he held back from the Wise Ones, it was in open anger at him for keeping secrets from them. Never slyly, never trying to ferret something out. Bludgeon, maybe, but never ferret. He considered the possibility that she was like one of Colavir's young women, but only for the brief moment it took to think of the notion. Aviendha would never let herself be used in that way. Besides, even if she had, giving him one taste of herself, then denying him so much as a kiss afterward, not to mention making him chase her halfway around the world, was no way to go about it. If she was more than casual about being naked in front of him, Aiel customs were different. If his distress at it dissatisfied her, likely it was because she thought it was a great joke to play on him. So what was she supposed to be successful at? Plots all around him. Was everyone scheming? He could see his face in her eyes. Who had given her that silver necklace? "I like canoodling as much as the next man," Mat said, "but don't you think there are a few too many people watching?" Rand released Aviendha's waist and stepped back, but no more quickly than she. She bent her head, fussing with her skirt, muttering about how riding had disarrayed it, but not before he saw her cheeks redden. Well, he had not meant to embarrass her.
All right, just a couple going on there.
Yes,
Matt's comment. You two get a room. Because, like, okay, his entire inner monologue is how, gosh, I don't understand what she could possibly have over me. It's not like we're, you know, she's not one of Colver's women who I'm totally entranced with. Meanwhile, he's staring deep into her eyes, holding her arms, not moving. And the wise ones are like, yeah, she got him. Because, like, he is totally into her. 100% obsessed. He dismisses it, where he's like, oh, she's trying to be a spy, or she's trying to be one of Colver's, like, loose skirts who's kind of control me with power. None of that is true. All they want him to do is love the Aiel people. They want him to form an attachment to the people and see them as more than spears, but see them as people. Amis is basically reading it better than most of them. She's been more successful than you know.
I'm nodding.
No. But I just love how he's, like, convinced that he hasn't fallen for it. Meanwhile, he's, like, totally... His thoughts are, I haven't fallen for it, and his actions are 100% falling. Like, unreliable narrator contradiction that you see so much in Rand comes out. And in so many of the characters is coming out very strong here.
I don't think it was the Wise Ones or Avienda's intent ever for sex to be the weapon of choice. But it's happening. Or, I mean, it happened once.
I mean, they put a pretty young girl with him. And they were like, you know, what happens, happens, but we're just gonna... Any man would enjoy the attention of a pretty young woman. Now, is sex necessarily the point? No. The attention is the point. And in a lot of ways, you know, we can argue about what makes a relationship. Is it the attention, the conversation, the fact that someone is there when you wake up and when you go to sleep and is there to take care of you and make sure that you know, look after you? Is that what makes a relationship, or is it the sex?
Well, you know, both.
You know,
but the sex isn't
both.
The important part of building that intimacy. It's not the most important part, but it certainly works. You know, it'll certainly slingshot you in the right direction.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So, yeah, like I think Aradia has a good line here. Intimacy was the goal, physical or emotional.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, more emotional. They don't want to send him one of Colver's flip skirts because they understand that, like, a physical fucking isn't necessarily going to make him look at the Aiel people in the right way. Yeah.
It doesn't build a real relationship, for lack of a better way of saying that.
So I think in a lot of ways, Avienda has been super successful.
Yes. The Wise One's plan is working.
It's working. There's a little bit of a trope here where we see someone's conversation from someone else's perspective that they're not supposed to overhear. I feel like that's a fantasy trope of, like, oh, even back to, like, Matt overhearing Rahvin planning to kill Elaine, right? That happens just a lot where it's like, oh my god, over here. But I kind of like the way this gets turned on his head where they're like, hey, you're not supposed to be listening to us. And he's like, oops, sorry. As they're talking about him, right?
Yeah.
And I believe Amis is about to say, I've waited for her to tell us, but since she will not say she slept with him, I will say it.
Yeah.
And then she cuts off abruptly because she sees Rand standing there. But she's about to say she slept with him.
Talk about softening him up. Good job, Avienda. And she's like, I was actually trying not to sleep with him, but okay.
And then he's always wondering about where that bracelet comes from, even though it's Egwene gave it to her. The necklace. He gave her the bracelet. Egwene gave her the silver snowflake necklace.
But no one will explain when he asks. Avienda is always like, well, this wasn't an interest gift either, Rand al'Thor, so...
It's making him jealous. And by the way, how do you know it's not an interest gift? Do you know what Egwene...
I mean, she seems pretty straight to me, but you never know.
She is really into Galwin and Galad. She does want to know where the bracelet comes from, that's true. It's funny they never put it together. It's like, who does Avienda spend the most time with besides you? The other person from your village. Avienda has to be like the Wetlander Whisperer. She spends more time talking to Wetlanders than any of the other Aiel. Everyone must be like, Avienda, how do you talk to them all this time? Between Rand and Egwene and then becoming first sisters with Elaine?
I like that Kel said she's a girlfriend to Avi and Rand in different ways. That's true.
I saw a pie chart today that was the true conflict in the Wheel of Time, and it was like 1% Ishmael, 10% the Dark One, 89% lack of communication.
Well, yeah, but, you know, that's real life, guys. It is.
Oh, God, yes.
You ever stop and, like, think about how often the things you say are totally misinterpreted by other people, but they just never say or do it?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah. Sometimes I'll look back on a conversation and I'll realize someone's response is to a misinterpretation of what I said. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you misunderstood that. And I didn't understand your misunderstanding. And I'm like, we aren't communicating. Ugh, it's very frustrating.
That's why I think about it sometimes, because sometimes people, like, I'll ask a question and someone answers in a way that tells me that they misheard me, and I just let it go because I know that in order to explain what just happened, so just so that I can get a real answer to this question is going to take like 3 more minutes, and I don't care. So I just let it go. It leads me to wonder how many other people also do that. Probably a lot. Probably most of us.
Yeah, a lot. Well, and that's just assuming I've heard what you've said in the first place. Like, half the time, like, hell, in a work environment or a busy kitchen or even in the warehouse where you're far away and, like, walking, like, I don't hear half of what people fucking say. I'm like, not interpreting. What is it when you fill in the gaps? There's a word for that.
Yeah, interpreting's good enough, I think. Interpolating?
Interpolating. I think that's correct.
Good word, Hopper Lives.
I'm interpolating.
Sounds like a real word.
Yeah, I knew there was a word for it. Extrapolating. So anyway, yeah, I'm extrapolating, basically, on the environment and the few things they've said, and I'm trying to fit in what the words are missing. And it's definitely a strategy that people have who are hard of hearing as well, just in normal conversation. But yeah, it's amazing, like, our minds make up reality. They just make it up.
Yep. We
think we hear things that we don't hear. We think we see things we don't see. We miss half of reality. It's the more I learn about our brain, the more I'm like, holy fuck, how have I not died yet? It's kind of the same thing the more I learn about computers, the more I'm like, how do these rocks that we run electricity through not completely malfunction all the time? It just doesn't make sense. They should break constantly. And yet they work. Looks like we're packing about 6,000 Aiel into the square. Probably, I wouldn't say all of them make it through the gateway. What would you say? Maybe half make it through? 3,000?
There's no way to know. Rand has to go in first, so they just cram as many people as they can in there. I don't know that we ever get a real number or even a visualization for how many he can't fit. But basically he makes the skimming platform just as big as he possibly can, and he even makes it a hair bigger than that and realizes that if he extends himself in this way, then it's like walking on an eggshell. If he continues to extend himself, so he moves it back in, he makes it a little bit smaller, and then he loads it up.
How much do you think his limit is set by his initial choices? You know, he says here, he doesn't say, Lewis Theron says, we all make our limits, and we set them further than we have any right.
Oh, yeah.
Which is an interesting quote.
There's a bunch of interesting stuff here. I want to read these, 4 paragraphs from 4 paces was as large as Rand could make it. Just while we're in Rand's head, while he's making the platform, because I felt like there were a couple of neat little things that we don't hear much about.
And right before that, there's also some interesting description of what a gateway looks like.
I'll start there. The gateway appeared at the foot of the steps. First, a bright line that seemed to turn, opening into a square hole into the blackness 4 paces wide. Not a murmur came from the Aiel. Those beyond would be able to see him as though through a smoked glass, a dusky shimmering in the air, but they could as well try walking through one of the palace walls. From the side, the gateway would be invisible, except to the few close enough to see what might seem a long, fine hair drawn tight. I thought that was mainly interesting because RJ describes it from the side, which was kind of interesting.
And the back.
The back, yeah.
The only time we ever get to see a description of all 4 sides of the gateway.
Yeah.
And a description particularly of a square.
Yeah, and also mentions that it was a square. I somehow missed that, like my first read, and then after that, I always imagined the gateway Scroll of Town portal from Diablo 2. Yeah, the blue oval, yeah.
But no, this is 4 paces by 4 paces, which is not that tall, really.
No, it's not huge.
I mean, he says a square hole 4 paces wide. He doesn't specify how tall, but if it's a square, basic geometry says 4 paces tall.
12 by 12 is a little larger than the average American bedroom, which I think are usually closer to like 9 by 9.
Right. So it's like a barn door.
Yeah, it's like a fairly large room. Yeah, barn door. Something like that.
Okay. For some reason, I was thinking 3 yards. Or 3 feet. Whatever. I was getting my
I always call a pace 3 feet in my head.
3 feet. Yeah. No, that's right, because a yard is a pace. Those are basically the same things. But I think one of the most interesting things about the portal is that if you're looking through the back, you can see through it, just like looking through smoky glass.
Yeah.
And that's one of the few times I think we get a description of the back as well.
Kind of looks like an entry to the ways.
Very much so, yeah. Well, that's good. That's a good point. Although this one is not, you can't go through it, right? He says it's like trying to run through a wall.
Yeah. He stepped through onto what appeared to be a paving stone lifted from the courtyard. But here, the gray square hung in the midst of utter darkness, with a sense that in every direction there was nothing. Nothing. Forever. It was not like night. He could see himself and the stone perfectly, but everything else, everywhere else, was blackness. It was time to see how large he could make a platform. With the thought, more stones appeared all at once, duplicating the courtyard to an inch. He imagined it larger still. That quickly, gray stones stretched as far as he could see. With a start, he realized that his boots were beginning to sink into the stone under his feet. It looked no different, yet it yielded slowly like mud, oozing up around his boots. Hastily, he brought everything back to a square, the size of what was outside. That much stayed solid, then began increasing it by one outer row of stones at a time. It did not take long to realize he could not make the platform much larger than his first attempt. The stone still looked all right. It did not sink beneath his feet, but the second added row felt insubstantial, like a thin shell that might crack at a wrong step. Was that because this was as large as the thing could be made, or because he had not thought of it larger at first? We all make our limits. The thought slid up surprisingly from somewhere, and we set them further out than we have any right. Rand felt himself shiver. In the void, it seemed like feeling someone else shiver. It was well to be reminded that Lews Therin was still inside him. He had to be careful not to fall into a battle for self while confronting Rahvin. I just included half that secondary paragraph because I just wanted to illustrate that Rand is always thinking about if a thought from Lews Therin comes at the wrong time, he could die. For some reason, he believes this.
Well, I mean, he's fighting insanity, right? I mean, this is what I always assume is going on in his head, is he's fighting for control versus the taint over his own sanity, and he's walling off the insanity in this voice that is Lews Therin. The other thing I noticed is, and it was right before what you read, Moghedien calls the skimming area a dream of a dream, which, of course, makes me think it's a dream of Teleron-Riyadh, that somehow it's in that same space. And we've talked about how skimming and the ways and all of that, it goes through Teleron-Riyadh and somehow uses the world of dreams.
Yeah, it's like the space in between reality and the dream, which is kind of reality.
The hub of the wheel.
I'm just seeing what's going on in Discord right now. I included that half a paragraph at the end of my read there because as I was reading that, I saw that fits right into your theory about Rand believing that because he's getting this information, that is the madness. And, I mean, that's correct to a degree. But it's not the information he should be afraid of. It's the fact that he's getting it. And Lews Therin is not... He couldn't communicate with Rand because Rand is Lews Therin. So it's only... If the soul is in Rand, he can't, he'd just be talking to himself then.
Yeah, it was well to be reminded that Lewis Theron was still inside of him. There's nobody inside of him. It's just him. It's him and a crazy and his own crazy voice in his head. The image that Min has of him and another man, where she can't see his face, merging together, and only one of them survives, he thinks that's him and Lewis Theron merging together. But it's not. It's him and Moghedien merging together. There is no two people for Rand to merge with. He was always Lewis Theron. Rand is Lewis Theron. Lewis Theron is Rand.
What he knows, he knows. It's not another human being inside of his head. That doesn't make any sense.
But he does know that he has to make sure he controls his, what he calls his battle for self, whether it's his battle for being sane or his battle against, LTT, which is a manifestation of his insanity. He knows it's a threat, and it comes out when he channels powerfully, and when he basically becomes really emotional. This battle kind of starts out with him getting a little emotional because his best friend and his girlfriend and his tutor are all killed instantly.
I just think that the paranoia and later true insanity that we see is the same paranoia and insanity that we see in the other Ashaman, for instance, but they all
absolutely
visualize that in a different way because we're all different. Our fears are all slightly different, although I think we'll find that they're all similar when you get down to it. So you've got one Ashaman that's afraid that there's Murdral creeping out of every shadow, and another one that sees shadows that turn into spiders. The difference really is small.
They believe the Murdral and the spiders are real, right?
Yes.
And Rand believes that Lewis Theron is real. None of them are real.
No.
They're all insane. They're just unable to differentiate, hey, those fades aren't real. They cannot figure that out. In the same way, Rand cannot figure out that LTT isn't a real person in his head. It's his insanity.
Yeah, don't we see one Ashaman in the late books kind of struggling with it for a time, where they is it the one that sees spiders crawling around? He sees the spiders but knows they're not there and just tries really hard to ignore them?
Once Nynaeve heals him, he has this realization. He's like, what the fuck? That was crazy. Of course there aren't frickin' Murdral in the shadows. Or Andral has the Murdral.
Ah, the Spider Boy gets the wine. Hilarious way to say it, but yes,
poisoned wine.
I remember that now.
Yeah, yes. So he's the first one before Fedwin with the blocks.
Spider Boy gets the wine. Can we make that a thing?
Yeah. Spider Boy gets the wine.
Oh no, I love it.
I want that on a hat.
Should make that a thing. When someone gets too drunk at SpoilerCon or something. Better watch out, man. You start acting weird, you get the special wine.
Nynaeve has the Murdral as his... I have to go back and read the Sanderson books again.
Is it Nynaeve? Is that how you say that?
Nynaeve said.
Yeah, good to know. That's just one of the ones that I have not learned yet. He's not around yet. Said Nynaeve. All this time.
I think Nynaeve is how it's said in the audiobooks.
That's what everyone seems to be saying. Rand reduces the platform by one outer ring of stones, and then he lets everyone on because he's worried, basically, that they might not hold. They do all hold, though.
Yeah,
we don't hear about it breaking.
But someone falls off the edge.
One of the maidens falls, yeah.
I don't think it's a maiden. I think it's not a maiden.
Oh, true. We don't actually know that.
But I'd like to hear arguments on both sides.
I really liked Pevin in this chapter. This was kind of a throwaway. I really like this character. We talked about it in the chapter where you get a single paragraph description of his life. He's old, veteran type. Everyone in his family has died. And he's the only one left. So Rand makes him his bannerman. He's this old grandpa character.
Pevin's one of those characters that has almost no screen time and yet is so well written that I remember him extremely vividly as a character.
Yeah.
The bannerman who doesn't talk and dies very quickly, and his whole family's dead. And he's just tragic. His whole life is one of the biggest tragedies, and you just kind of move on from it. And it's one of those little details that makes the world round.
It just reminds me of the old war veterans in my family. So these old men that don't really talk. They're always kind of frowning. Sounds funny to describe, but there's like a warm place in my heart for some of these lines.
Bitter old men who just like, yep, that's life.
Rand turns back around after making the platform. There's little lines like this. Bale was waiting out there in what seemed a huge square doorway into daylight with the steps beyond. At his side, Pevin looked no more perturbed by what he saw than the Aiel chief, which was to say, not at all. Just imagine Bale and Grandpa standing next to him, and like they're watching these wonders being worked by the Dragon Reborn, and they're both just kind of staring, like expressionless. Like it doesn't makes no difference to them what kind of wonders are worked.
Well, and I love the image of a square flooded with Aiel, and all the Caerianen are avoiding them, and then this Pevin is just like, yep, I'm standing right here in the middle with the banner. Nothing's gonna stop me. I don't know why, but it warms a place in my heart for Pevin.
Me too.
That he just doesn't care. He's just there to carry the banner. Hell, high water, Aiel, no prejudice, no doubt. Just, this is the dragon. I will support him, even if it's just carrying his banner into battle.
Yeah, it's a great miniature story all by itself, that this man who's lost everything and the war against the shadow, because his last act when he's alone and everyone in his family is dead is to carry the banner of the light until he dies also, and he does.
And the genius of Jordan to write this character so well, so deeply in, I don't know, a dozen sentences scattered throughout 2 or 3 chapters.
There's like a page about this character in the whole series.
And he's highly in a large series, and he's just highly memorable. So it is one of the reasons why he's one of my favorites. He's so well written, so briefly written, so inspired by what I assume is Jordan's real experience with old veterans like this.
I'm sure. Matt mutters about the dice in his head before stepping through, I noticed.
Oh, yep. We are definitely talking about the dice rattling in his head because something significant is about to happen. Like him dying and living again. The fulfillment of the prophecy is about to happen. So, yeah. I imagine there's some dice rattling in his head because this is significant to his timeline.
The only thing I also had of note right there was that Moghedien finds Rand's gateway impressive. He seems... I believe him, because he's just kind of mumbling to himself.
Well, I mean, Rand is one of the most powerful channelers, and I think Moghedien, the size of the gateway you make is directly correspondent to... The largest gateway you can make corresponds to how much power you have, and Rand makes the biggest gateway of really anybody without a circle or an Angreal. So... Or an
Andral.
That's
not even fair, though.
That doesn't, Andral breaks the system. But Andral's gateway, he had a full circle behind him, right? And I think some Angreal in there.
Oh, yeah.
Or not a full circle, but a big circle behind him. A circle of 13.
When he dumps out a volcano.
Yeah. Also, there's a whole discussion about pressure differences in gateways, and that we need to talk about when we get there. And the fact that, okay, so here's the discussion. Basically, if you weave a gateway from sea level to the top of a mountain, say like the top of Dragon Mount, the pressure difference would cause hurricane force winds.
Yeah.
So something in the gateway has to be regulating the pressure. And when Andral summoned the gateway to the underground lava, it shot out like it was under pressure. So he must have disabled whatever was regulating the pressure in the gateway. He had to have deliberately made that choice, because otherwise, every time you open a gateway between different elevations, you would end up with just like crazy wind. And Aradia says, from a geology perspective, the lava should have exploded to a much greater degree in that scene rather than poured.
I have a question. If you open a gateway from, say, a cold place to a hot place, doesn't really matter which side you're on. Let's say you're in the cold place, you open a gateway to the hot place. Can you feel the heat while standing on the other side of the gateway?
Yes.
You can.
Because there's a couple of things where they because they feel the heat radiating from the gateway when he opens to the fire. There's a couple of scenes where Rand feels like the sunlight coming through on his skin. You know, like you can feel the radiant heat coming off the sun.
I'm just going to chalk that up to it's already been figured out. Someone engineered this weave perfectly.
You know what I can say to that? It's magic. and these are books.
Yes, but it's sensible magic.
I know. I don't say that out loud very often on the podcast, but occasionally you just have to go, you know what?
It's magic, dude.
It's magic. It's magic. He wanted a way to travel. He made a doorway you could walk through.
I do it sometimes.
I mean, do we want to talk about Monsters Inc. that has the same problem? Like every time you open a doorway to a closet, like, you know, those are clearly at different elevations. Right? Like, Monsters, Inc. has that issue with the monsters. No one talks about that. Like, gateways are a thing. We just assume that they regulate the pressure and you step through them and it's fine.
Sometimes we fall too far down a hole and I'll say something like that. Like, you know what else doesn't make any sense? Everybody's shooting fire out of their hands. That doesn't make But yes,
listen,
yes.
If the wheel repeats forever, wouldn't the star die out? Like, come on. Like, planets have a geological history. You can't just repeat that over and over and over again. There's a creator and a dark one, and they have certain effects.
Here's one more thing I'll also read. As the numbers increase, so the platform is filling, Rand moved to the far side of the platform from the gateway. There was no need to see where he was going, really, but he wanted to. In truth, he could have remained at the other end, or gone to one side. Direction here was mutable. Whatever way he chose to move would take him to Caemlyn, if done properly. That was another little factoid I had never picked up on, that once everything's set to skim, you go in any direction. Like, you don't actually move toward Caemlyn. It doesn't matter, because you're not in a place, per se. You're outside of space.
This is one of those times when I really go back to Jordan's engineering background, which I kind of share, so I have some commonality. That, like, when you talk about relativity and, you know, when you have the ability to... One of the things you have to do in math oftentimes is set your coordinates. And picking your coordinates has so much effect on the math that even though you could pick any coordinates, there's often special coordinates that help you out. But one of the interesting things is when you're doing a lot of math, a lot of times it doesn't matter what your starting place is. Everything's relative to what you pick as your starting place. And, you know, like a voltage is a difference, right? Voltage has no absolute value. It's just a difference between two states.
Right.
And there's a lot of physics stuff like that. And that's sort of how I imagine he's thinking about this space, is that the blackness is relative to the real world, and since you can kind of picture it any way you want, you just picture a direction relative to Earth, and you go in that direction. But you can set it in any relative to yourself any way you want.
I kind of summed it up in my mind as everything loses meaning because there is no space. They're outside of it, so it doesn't matter which way you go, because that's only a concept that matters when you exist inside of space.
The enemy's gate is down.
At some point, Rand yells enough when he sees that people are having trouble fitting anymore on the platform.
He's like, clear the gateway, I don't want to cut any of you in half.
Yeah, that was a good question you had right in the beginning when you asked how many of the IEL actually make it onto the platform. Don't know, but we know it's not all of them.
And so the upper limit is 6,000. I'm assuming half-ish, maybe a little more than half, make it onto the platform.
Yeah, because Rand says I think he recreates the original courtyard and then makes it much bigger or something. I'm not going to go back and find it, but he just expands it vastly. Yeah, right. So then he goes back down and then back up again, and we don't really know.
If it's any bigger than the courtyard, he starts to sink through it. So he has to keep it at the size of the courtyard. It makes it like about a foot smaller than that, just so he has a little bit of fudge room. So it's like it's exactly the size of the courtyard. And we know that of the 6,000 Aiel that tried to crowd in and accompany him, not all of them fit into the courtyard. Most of them did, though.
It seemed like it, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm guessing it's like... Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm guessing it's almost 6,000. So 5 to 6,000 Aiel are probably in that courtyard. A few maybe didn't make it in. Because it was 6,000 Aiel plus the maidens he brought. And he makes sure, he says, stay away from the edge. I like that Matt goes, this is worse than the flaming ways, which gave him a startled look from Asmodean. Which Asmodean's like, you've been in the ways? Because, again, Matt kind of portrays himself as a bungler. And there's been a couple of times where Matt's like done something and Asmodean's been like, wait, what? And that plus the whole traveling through the ways, which I guess Rand hasn't told him that part of the story.
No, probably not. A slight stir ran through the Aiel. What is it? Rand asked. Murmurs came across the platform. Someone fell. The bulky man near him said at last. Rand recognized him. Mechiar, or Mechiar. He was Cordare, a night spear. He wore the red headband. Not one of the... Rand began, then caught Sulin looking at him, flat-eyed. Just looking to see if there's any other information, but yeah, that's all we get, so we don't know.
We don't know. Someone fell, and he's like, is it one of the... And she's like, don't ask. And so he never... he later seeks it out, but I don't think it's one of... I think he figures out later that it's not one of the maidens. I think he fears that it's one of the maidens, and he thinks about how, like... Wait, what? So I guess I shouldn't value a maiden life more than a regular life, but I do. I'm glad it wasn't one of the maidens. So I'm pretty sure that it was just a dude.
I'm nodding. It could have been anyone. And Sulin just looks at him when Rand makes eye contact and doesn't make any expression or anything. I think, at first I interpreted that as her saying, like, I'm not saying, like, F off. But I think now I'm more inclined now to believe that what actually is happening is Sulin is saying, go ahead and ask. because by asking, Rand would be going back on what they just discussed recently.
Right, exactly. She's like, don't fucking try it.
You have to treat the maidens like regular soldiers, and if they were a regular soldier, Rand would never typically care, like, oh, someone died? What was his society? Well, what does it matter?
His first question can't be, not one of the maidens. The only thing I have to say about that is just the horrendous fear of falling through the endless black has to be one of the things that gave me nightmares growing up, having read this. Like, of all the things, all the horror elements of the Wheel of Time, the one thing that made me wake up in the middle of the night, out of breath, heart thundering, was falling endlessly through the dark. Out of all the horrible tortures, out of all, like, pain, cutting, dismemberment, eating, trollocs, torture, pain, all that's fine. Falling endlessly through the dark, not okay. Not okay with that.
Falling forever through endless black. Would sanity crack before death came? From starvation, or thirst, or fear? In that fall, even an Aiel must eventually find fear strong enough to stop a heart. He almost hoped so. It would be more merciful than the other.
And don't forget, that's how Matt kills the golem. The one thing that he really hates, he gets rid of by dropping off a platform and hoping that it can live forever and experience the endless falling dark for all of eternity. Obviously, this scene, I think, stuck with Sanderson as well to write that death for the golem. And I like the foreshadowing of it as well. That this is how Matt ends up killing the golem. He remembers this. I don't know who the first name on his list of dead maidens was. I mean, obviously, Ilyana is the first name. But, I mean, often he starts it with the nameless woman he killed in the caravan, right? Like, he goes back that far sometimes. Or Moraine. Sometimes Moraine starts it, yep. Mostly because she died because he couldn't kill a woman. And that's sort of where he's caught in this catch-22 of, like, a woman's gonna die, and I basically have to choose which one. That messes with his head. But yeah, so he knows basically that he's walking into a battle, some maidens will die, and he's basically prepping himself to be upset with himself for everyone who dies in that battle.
Yeah. Also, is this the chapter where he comes up with the idea of the list? I think it might be.
It might be.
I don't think he's thought about it until right here.
He knew he would search out the name of everyone who died, and that every name would be another knife cut on his soul.
That's the
I
one.
will be hard. The light help me. I will. And that's sort of his beginning to becoming Gwendiar Rand, Darth Rand.
Thinks about his girlfriends and about how he's about to start his assault on the Caemlyn Palace at the place where he originally broke in.
Yeah, I love that wall that he gets to climb. Like, he climbs it, Matt climbs it, and then we have this whole confrontation there. It's one of those points that I hope they showcase in the TV show and, like, show this. Like, this is one of those locations that, like, you can see it change. And then, like, again, when Caemlyn gets sacked, like, it would be really cool to show this location, like, getting destroyed over and over and over again. Yeah, he remembers the letters. I think there's a good description of the letters here. The memory of a letter laying out her heart and soul at his feet, and a memory of another letter icily spurning him, a queen condemning a swineherd to outer darkness. Outer description. Outer darkness.
Not
a
even
swineherd. No.
Way out there.
That we never actually get the text of that letter. We just get these little hints that he drops about, like, wow, she really dug into him. Really dug into him.
He deserves it.
Sometimes. And then he opens the gateway and they all go dashing out. And like I said, 5,000 people have to pass through this gateway. And I have to wonder if maybe the time it took them to pass through the gateway is what gave Rahvin the time to strike back.
It could certainly partly be the time, but at the end of this, when Nynaeve is talking to Moghedien says that Rahvin said wards all over the city. So if any man channeled, he would know immediately.
But, you know, it takes a minute to let 6,000 people run through a gateway, no matter how big it is.
Of course.
And Rahvin doesn't attack until Bran's all the way through. So I have to wonder if he sensed it and then, like, was like, sweet, I'm going to set up a nice big attack, wait till everybody's through, and bam.
Yeah. And this is relevant. The only other thing I wanted to say going into the read out of Rand's perspective here is that the streets are quiet. And at first, it's not really mentioned, but it's the middle of the day, remember. As we're just outside of the palace here. This is like almost the center of the old city, and no one's on the street, not one person. So,
do we have an idea who told Rahvin that Rand was coming? He kind of made it pretty clear. A lot of people knew. I mean, even Pevin showed up.
Yeah, somehow Moghedien knows that he's leaving now. Because when she's talking to Nynaeve later, and I imagine that this is happening... Oh, let's see, it's nighttime in Saladar, so hours later. Maybe as much as a day. But the point is, Moghedien says, like, I think he's left already. Like, he's probably left already. But he was going to attack today. Yeah.
He's supposed to leave at sunrise.
Today. So then he probably already attacked already. So somehow Moghedien knows what's going on. The only thing I can think of is maybe she's monitoring the Wise Ones communicating in the dream. How else could she know?
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So you think Moghedien spying on Rand and conveying the information back to the other Forsaken, or do you think because they've formed an alliance, but it doesn't include Moghedien, right? It's Grendel, Lanfear, Samael, and Rahvin are the four.
Right. So
how are they getting the information?
How do they know?
Yeah.
Lanfear could have passed them some pittances.
Not anymore.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, Moghedien would know, right? But I guess Lanfear would be the one but she can't pass that information on that he's coming for Rahvin.
Sure.
I guess she could have passed that on No, she doesn't even know because she's just showing up and she has no idea what's going on with Rand. That's why she shows up and asks.
Kadir. I wanted to say, Sharmi wrote that Moghedien spies on Lanfear. We do know that. So that's also definitely a possibility there too.
I'm just saying Lanfear wouldn't know.
Oh, that Rand is about to attack?
Yeah.
Yeah, then gotta go with my original thing there. Moghedien must be monitoring the Wise One's dreams.
But how does Rahvin know?
The ward.
Which was my original... Yeah, the ward. Well, but no, he's got to... The Trollocs have to be there The Trollocs have to be set up long before...
Yes. Way before.
Like, that can't... He has to have some forewarning. my biggest question is like, okay, I get the lightning. I get he had wards. He sensed them. It took him a few minutes to get out. That was enough time to weave some really badass lightning and come down on him. Fine. All that makes sense. How the fuck were the Trollocs there?
Moghedien makes it sound like Rahvin was preparing for an attack long before he ever thought Rand would come. If he ever thought Rand would come. Rahvin, well, Moghedien says this, and so we have to take that with a grain of salt, but Moghedien tells Nynaeve that Rahvin is mistrustful of the other three. He thinks it's just as likely that the trap is actually for him, Rahvin.
Right.
So he may have been preparing, or Moghedien says he's definitely been preparing for this.
He's definitely been preparing. I'm just wondering how he guessed the exact spot where Rand was about to open a gateway and have a bunch of Trollocs, unless he's got Trollocs all over the city, which is a lot of Trollocs, which makes sense. I mean, he's had a lot of time to import them.
Yeah, the only way I can explain that is just he had the wards, he had the Trollocs. It stands to reason that he had the wards and the Trollocs and a short amount of time.
Okay, so here's my theory. He had enough time for all those Aiel to exit the gateway to move the Trollocs that he had stationed inside the palace. They weren't, at the wall, but they were in the palace. And he was able to be like, okay, this gateway was opened really close by. A gateway, right outside the palace walls, Rahvin's going to sense that. And he's able to move the Trollocs in the palace to the wall in the time it took Rand to get the Aiel out of the gateway.
Nodding to that.
Yeah, so that's how. And then once he had the Aiel out of the gateway, Rahvin was able to make the lightning strike and send the Trollocs to attack. But he had them ready, definitely. He didn't know exactly where Rand was going to come, but I think he had the Trollocs ready to attack. Yeah.
Roughly.
Okay. I feel like I have that all sorted in my own head. Do you want to go ahead and do your read?
Aiel filled the street, fanning out quickly into side streets that spiraled away from the palace. Aiel, and not a soul else. The sun was high enough for people to be out and about their business, even this close to the palace. Like a nightmare, the wall above toppled outward in half a dozen places, Aiel and stones smashing down on those still climbing. Before those bouncing, sliding chunks of masonry reached the streets, Trollocs appeared in the openings, dropping the tree-thick battering rams they had used and drawing scythe-curved swords. More, with spiked axes and barbed spears, huge man-shapes in black mail with spikes at shoulders and elbows, huge man-faces distorted by snouts and muzzles, beaks and horns and feathers, plunging down the slope with eyeless murdrawl, like midnight serpents in their midst. All along the street, howling Trollocs and silent murdrawl poured from doorways, leapt from windows, lightning stabbed from the cloudless sky. Rand wove fire and air to meet fire and air, a slow spreading shield racing lightning's fall. Too slow. One bolt struck the shield directly above his head, shattering in a blinding glare, but others grounded themselves, and his hair lifted as the air itself seemed to hammer him down. Almost he lost the weave, almost the void itself, but he wove what he could not see, through eyes still filled with coruscating light, spread the shield against bolts from the heavens, that he could at least feel hammering at it, hammering to reach him. But that could change. Drawing Saidin through the Angredal in his pocket, he wove the shield until he was sure it must cover half of the inner city, then tied it off. As he pushed himself to his feet, sight began to return, watery and painful at first. He had to move fast. Rahvin knew he was here. He had to... Surprisingly little time had passed, seemingly. Rahvin had not cared how many of his own he took. Stunned Trollocs and murdrawl on the slope were falling to spears in the hands of maidens, many of whom moved unsteadily themselves. Some maidens, those nearest Rand, were only now pulling themselves up from where they had been flung, and Pevin stood spraddle-legged, holding himself upright with the red banner's staff, his scarred face still blank as slate. More Trollocs boiled through the gaps in the wall above, and the din of battle filled the streets in all directions, but it might as well have been in another country, so far as Rand was concerned. There had been more than one bolt in that first volley, but not all had been aimed at him. Mat's smoking boots lay a dozen paces from where Mat himself sprawled on his back. Tendrils of smoke rose from the black haft of his spear, too, from his coat, even the silver fox head, hanging out of his shirt. That had not saved him from a man's channeling. As Moghedien was a twisted shape of char, recognizable only from the blackened harp case still strapped to his back, and Avienda, unmarked. She could have laid down to rest, if she could have rested staring unblinking at the sun. Rand bent to touch her cheek, cooling already. It felt not like flesh. Rahvin! It startled him a little, that sound coming from his throat.
I was hoping you'd really go for it on that one.
He seemed to be sitting somewhere deep in the back of his own head. The void around him, vaster, emptier than it had ever been before. Saidin raged through him. He did not care if it scoured him away. The taint seeped through everything, tarnished everything. He did not care. Three Trollocs broke past the maidens, great spiked axes and oddly hooked spears and hairy hands, all too human eyes fixing on him, standing there, apparently unarmed. The one with a boar's tusk snout went down with Anyla's spear through its spine. Eagle's beak and bear's muzzle raced on toward him, one on booted feet, the other on paws. Rand felt himself smile. Fire burst from the two Trollocs, a flame at every pore, bursting through black mail. Even as their mouths opened to scream, a gateway opened right there where they stood. Bloody halves of burning, cleanly sliced Trolloc fell, but Rand was staring through the opening, not into blackness, but a great columned hall with lion-carved stone panels, where a large man with wings of white and his dark hair started up in surprise from a gilded throne. A dozen men, some dressed as lords, some in breastplates, turned to see what their master was looking at. Rand barely noticed them. Rahvin, he said, or someone did. He was not sure who. Sending fire and lightning ahead of him, he stepped through and let the gateway close behind him. He was death.
I have only one thing to say to that.
Huh.
Khan! Same energy.
Darth Rand has entered the chat. I like that, Bambi.
It's funny. I think I missed it the first time I read the book. That, like, all these people died and came back. It's so unexpected, and in a lot of ways, I'm like, wait, Matt's not actually dead, right? Like,
it goes by quick.
He can't be dead. And it goes by real quick, and they come back when he returns. So if you don't, like, read that paragraph closely, it's very easy to miss. But yeah, this is... I mean, Moghedien is a charred piece of nothing. Avienda's dead, most likely from, heart attack. And Matt, it's all about the boots. He's been blown free of his boots. The shoes come off, he must be dead. And then, of course, one of the biggest controversial quotes in this whole thing, the ter'angreal did not save him from a man's channeling. And yet, it does seem to protect him from the male half of the true source. There's two possibilities. Number one, lightning is indirect. And we see this a little bit in the previous battle. Rahvin creates the conditions with the power that creates the lightning, but the lightning itself is just a discharge of energy the way fire is, and so, or the way a thrown stone is. It's just the result, the physical result of the power, and he's not immune from the physical result of the power. The other possibility is we notice the medallion is outside of his shirt, so maybe it wasn't touching his skin, and maybe it doesn't protect him because he didn't have it actually touching his skin. That's a little more of a fringe theory.
Yeah, I'd go with the lightning. I mean...
Yeah. But the fox head hanging out of his shirt had not saved him. And the fact that maybe it just wasn't touching him didn't save him?
It could be, but I just think it's far more likely that it's the lightning.
I agree. But it's worth... I had that other theory as I was reading through this. I was like, it's hanging out of his shirt. Maybe he just didn't have it tucked in right. And, like, he does say as long as it's touching his skin, it protects him. But maybe it wasn't touching his skin.
It could be, too. Yeah.
But going into battle, Matt, who's paranoid about this stuff, who understands the value of the ter'angreal, would totally have had it touching him.
I would think so. He knows he's about to go fight a Forsaken.
And he knows the power is going to come into play. He would have that touching. So, and like Charmy points out, his boots flew off, so, clearly the medallion could come out of his shirt at the same time.
That's true.
So, yeah, that's the death of, Matt's not the only one who lives and dies again. A lot of the maidens do. There's so many effects of having these maidens being stunned with lightning that are undone when Rand Bael fires Rahvin. He undoes all of this.
Yeah.
Totally changes the dynamic of the battle.
A lot of people are saying, I see that they didn't catch how many people died in this scene in their first couple of read-throughs. And I'm not sure that I did either. Because it doesn't...
It's so fast, it's very easy to miss.
It's not that obvious that they're dead. Like, Matt's smoking and laying on the ground, he's been knocked out of his boots, but, like, is he breathing, though? You know, like, it doesn't say.
Moghedien was a twisted shape of char, recognizable only from the blackened harp case. Like, he dead. He real dead.
Highly likely. But yeah, it's there's not much here. It doesn't give you much time to really digest that.
No, it doesn't. But that's the whole, like, him reacting is like, Rahvin! He's reacting to basically the death of his the people who are closest to him right now.
Yeah.
All right, and then basically we go back in time a little bit and switch to a Nynaeve POV.
Scene opens up with Nynaeve teaching Swan about Teleran Riyadh. They're in the dream in Saladar, and, the blind leading the blind. It's not going well.
Right. and Nynaeve is using that ter'angreal that you have to channel into in order to stay. She's using the little, the one you have to channel spirit into in order to stay on Teleran Riyadh. And the one that basically prevents you from using any of your other powers effectively. That, like, as long as you're using this ter'angreal, you're not going to be able to channel worth a damn.
Mm.
And that's partially why I think she turns to using Teleran Riyadh itself against Moghedien, is because she cannot channel.
Oh.
Even when she's angry enough.
Oh, yeah.
Or cannot channel effectively, I should say.
We see in Nynaeve's head that she's teaching the Saladar 6 as well.
And it's going swimmingly.
Yeah, of course.
I like that she had the sheep's tongue in the sleeping draught she gave Suan to make her just like, it tastes terrible. Why? She's like, well, you deserve it. And it's like, I love her internal monologue of like, why does she like douse people with this stuff? Just because
she just likes it.
Being stubborn. She just likes to make people miserable.
Although I did have the funny thought while I was making notes for this chapter, do Nynaeve's medicines taste bad because the medicine tastes bad, or do Nynaeve's medicine taste bad because she's a horrible cook? she just has like no gauge to do a good job at this.
As much as I'd like to think that's headcanon, I think she makes them taste bad to punish the people. She's deliberately making them foul. But yeah, I like that idea. She's just so bad at making anything that all tastes bad.
At some point, after they actually swing at each other, Swan and Nynaeve. Oh, it's Birgitta that says it later, I think, when she's like, I realized something was off here, so I took the ter'angreal from Swan and drank the dregs of the potion you left her. By the way, that was horrible.
Totally. And Suan says it has a foul taste as well.
Yeah.
They both say it.
Charmy, I might have to headcanon that too. That Nynaeve means for it to taste good. She's just that bad of a... No, it's just a funny thought that crossed my mind.
She knows how bad sheep's tongue tastes, and whenever she adds it to a potion, she wants her patients to suffer a little bit of humility.
We see that Shiriam has assigned Theodrin to begin helping Nynaeve break her block, which of course never actually works.
No, if only Theodrin had just fucking held Nynaeve under the water. That's all you had to do.
Bambi nailing it again with humility.
Oh,
oh, that's so good, though. All right, moving forward.
I'm not moving forward. I need a moment of silence for humility.
Humility. Hold on, I'll say it one more time, then it'll be funny. I don't know why I do that.
Third time's
yeah,
the charm.
maybe if I explain the joke further.
I'm gonna have another beer while you explain the joke. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Julia's dad came out with this funny thing. I think it was on Christmas. So I was just like sitting with the family, drinking or whatever. And Julia's way worse for this than I am. I feel like where she'll like make a joke, no one gets it, and she'll like rewind, retell the whole joke in a different way. At some point, Julia's dad said something like, "Julia, I've told you before, if you have to explain it, it's not funny."
I can see Julia explaining her jokes. Yeah.
She does. I think I'm really lucky because I find that part really funny. So it works for me, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Well, me and Julia have always joked we have a very similar sense of humor.
Dry and wordplay-y. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe a little over-explainy. Why don't you go ahead and explain the humility? It's because Nynaeve is brewing a tea that makes her patients feel humility. And so it's a humility. It's a tea that helps them feel humility. So it's a humility. Just to explain the joke.
Okay, anyway.
Get it? You jump to conclusions. They're fighting. Nynaeve isn't playing fair. Suan kicks her. Nynaeve complains about how that's not fair. Then Suan starts laughing.
Yeah, Swan gets up and just laughs. Tells us a bit about her character.
Of course, Nynaeve hypocriticalness. Suan didn't seem to realize there was no need to brush away dust with your hands in Teleron Riyadh. Snatching away fingers that had been repairing her braid, Nynaeve got up quickly. She could have just imagined her braid fixed. So she's like,
I didn't even catch
while
that.
She's criticizing Suan for dusting herself off, she's doing the same thing by manually fixing her braid. And she's like, not until she sees Suan dusting herself off, she's like, oh, I don't need to be doing this. I should just make it fixed in Teleron Riyadh. But I like how that's a little foreshadowing for how she uses Teleron Riyadh to her advantage against Moghedien here in a second.
Yeah, good catch. And at some point, they're still like arguing and bickering with each other, and Nynaeve just reaches out and rips the ter'angreal off Swan's neck, and so Swan disappears.
Well, and there's a reason for that. She sees Moghedien in the window.
Yes.
So she's like, hey, maybe we should go. And Suwan's like, no, fuck you. We just got here. You're going to teach me. Because Suan thinks Nynaeve's trying to get out of teaching her. Meanwhile, Nynaeve's like, no, I saw Moghedien at the window, and I don't want to give that away, so please leave. Please leave. Get out. Fine. And he just grabs the ter'angreal away from Suan to basically force eject her from Teleron Riyadh.
Yeah. She sees her face for a moment in a window where she thinks she's seen it, and then starts making these decisions. She goes...
Well, she sees a face that could be Moghedien, and obviously it was.
Yeah.
Right? Like...
she's worried she may have hurt Swan because they don't know what happens if you just take the ter'angreal away from someone in the dream. Of course, nothing.
Doesn't seem to have any issues, yeah.
Nynaeve goes to Jareen in Caemlyn, which, if you guys don't remember, I sure didn't, is a small town in Caemlyn where Egwene and Nynaeve get the darter toward Tyr.
A big old rolling thing. Had a slow-talking captain and who moved slow. Looked at him like, fast? Why would I need to go fast? I got spices and carpets. That was the darter. So it must be, she thinks that if they don't know where she's going, they can't find her. But it seems to be that Moghedien clearly has the ability to find someone who knows they're in Teleron Riyadh. Like, Brigitte sure does. Brigitte is able to find anyone who knows they're in Teleron Riyadh. When she gets into Teleron Riyadh, she's like, I could sense two of you. And I knew one of them was you, and the other one must be Moghedien.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if Moghedien has a similar, in the same way that, like, Perrin can follow a scent trail, maybe Moghedien can follow this trail. And Amis also is able to find Egwene when she flees. So clearly, in a lot of ways, our Supergirls don't know as much about Teleron Riyadh in some ways as the people around them.
Yeah, Nynaeve doesn't realize how easy it is for her to be found.
Yeah, she just thinks she's safe just because she went somewhere that Moghedien doesn't know. And Moghedien's like, I don't know where this is, but I know where you are.
It's like that poor kindergartner that just, like, covers his eyes when he's playing hide and seek. Like, if I can't see you, you can't see me, right? Nah, man.
Right.
Nah.
Or the dog that hides behind the curtains with its tail,
Sticking out, yeah.
Sticking out, wagging.
But at this point, Nynaeve sits on a bench and she's looking down at the river and she's trying to figure out what the hell she's going to do. And she mumbles to herself, "There's nothing for it but to just tell them I saw Moghedien." And she means the Saladar Six. She believes she saw Moghedien, so she thinks she should report it to the Saladar Six, but she's not supposed to be in Tel Renriad at all at this point, so it's a bit of a problem.
So she has to admit that she was in there when she shouldn't have been.
And then she says aloud, "Light, they will give me to Foul Lane. I'd almost rather die." And Moghedien responds, "But you seem to enjoy running little errands for her," who's appeared behind Nynaeve.
Which is a really, really important fact. Because that little comment, "Oh, you seem to enjoy running errands for her," helps tell Nynaeve that Moghedien must be in Saladar. She must be there in the flesh to know that Falron likes sending her on these little errands. That's the clue she needs later to track her down and take her prisoner. One of the clues. There are other clues throughout the conversation, but this is sort of the first. So she stays in Tel'aran'rhiod and basically tries to make herself as angry as possible and tests out her channeling ability because that's her number one weapon against Moghedien. And she's like, how can I make myself more powerful? She tries to get angry as possible. She's sitting there like making herself super angry and channels a flame and it disappears. Like she has no channeling ability whatsoever.
Right. She tries to shield Moghedien. It doesn't work at all. It just kind of bounces right off of her. And I imagine this is the kind of, shall I call it, mixed channeling that can happen in Tel'aran'rhiod, where, yeah, you can channel, but you can also do pretty much anything else with your mind, so you can mix these things together. Moghedien gets in some belittling titters, and before some
monologuing?
Some belittling titters and monologuing before Brigida shows up behind Moghedien and yells, "Hold, Moghedien."
Suan wakes up for a second and is like, I don't know what the fuck just happened. And Brigida's like, I can jump in to Tel'aran'rhiod with this Angreal. Which actually, and she has all the skills from being in Tel'aran'rhiod all this time. It kind of makes me angry, and I don't know if I've ever thought about this before. Why don't they use that? Why don't they give Brigida that Twisted Ring ter'angreal, put her in Tel'aran'rhiod, and use her skills and her abilities, and have her teach them?
Damn,
and
that is a good question.
Like, what the fuck? Like, why are they not taking advantage of Brigida? Like, they're desperately asking the wise ones to teach them, and they have Brigida with all the knowledge of Tel'aran'rhiod as a chosen one of the Horn of Valir, and who remembers everything, and they're not taking advantage of it.
Yeah, you'd at least think they'd ask.
That has never occurred to me before.
Bambi says maybe because she's not a channeler. Sharmi says because Brigida wouldn't want to go there. It's also possible.
I mean, I don't think she's scared. She's a little scared of Moghedien, but when they have Moghedien captured, it's not like she has to worry about that. But yeah, this is just another reason to be angry at Aes Sedai and who don't respect people who don't channel, and how much
they lost.
They're dependent on channelers, yeah. Like, she's able to track down Nynaeve with no problem.
That's a pretty basic Tel'aran'rhiod thing, too. Like, the things that Swan and Nynaeve are struggling with are, like, they're what the wise ones teach their, like, littlest girls who are first starting their training.
And, I mean, I know Brigida can't teach Suan because they're trying to keep her secret and everything. They're not spreading it around that's Brigida. But Brigida could teach Nynaeve. Brigida could teach Elaine.
Yeah. Charmy said also maybe her knowledge fades. That popped into my head too, but not yet. It doesn't work yet. Soon, in a little bit.
She's so skilled, and they don't use her at all.
And Super Chicken says Nynaeve wouldn't ask her, because she's still beating herself up. That's another good reason.
But I'm talking about later. There's a long, long time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, they miss a huge opportunity by not asking Brigida for tips on a couple of things, at least.
I mean, the whole, like, traveling to Abu Dar, right? Like, they have to ask the wise ones about the need thing. Like, they never, ever, ever go to Brigida for that information. I think the only reason is that maybe they asked and Brigida refused to teach because of the precepts.
Could be.
She's like, I am not a source of information for you. I have done enough to betray the precepts. Who enforces the precepts, where they come from, where the Horden of Lear comes from, those are open questions. Those are big open questions that we need to ask.
At this point, and I skipped over a bunch, like, because there's Moghedien's monologue, there's some back and forth, Nynaeve wondering what she could use, like if channeling's not going to work, like is there something else? And then Nynaeve starts begging for her life. Brigida's on the ground at this point, having just bought Nynaeve a few seconds.
She was just a distraction, basically.
Moghedien watched silently, until at last she said, "Once, I thought you were stronger than this. Now I find I truly like the sight of you on your knees. That is close enough, girl. Not that I think you have the courage to try tearing my hair out." She seemed amused by the notion. Nynaeve's hand wavered a span from Moghedien. It had to be close enough. There was only her, and Tel'aran'rhiod. The image formed in her head, and there it was. Silver bracelet on her outstretched wrist, silver leash, linking it to silver collar, around Moghedien's neck. It was not just the Adam she fixed in her head, but Moghedien wearing it. Moghedien and the Adam, a part of Tel'aran'rhiod that she held in the form she wanted. She knew something of what to expect. She had worn an Adam's bracelet briefly once, in Falma. In a strange way, she was aware of Moghedien in the same way she was aware of her own body, her own emotions. 2 sets, each distinct, but each in her own head. One thing she had only hoped, because Elaine insisted it was so. The thing was indeed a link. She could feel the source through the other woman. Moghedien's hand leapt to the collar, shocks rounding her eyes, rage and horror, rage more than horror at first. Nynaeve felt them almost as if they were her own. Moghedien had to know that what the leash and collar was, yet she tried to channel anyway. At the same time, Nynaeve felt a slight shifting in herself, in the Adam, as the other woman tried to bend Tel'aran'rhiod to herself. Suppressing Moghedien's attempt was simple. The Adam was a link, with her in control. Knowing that made it easy. Nynaeve did not want to channel those flows, so they were not channeled. Moghedien might as well have tried to pick up a mountain with her bare hands. Horror overwhelmed rage. Getting to her feet, Nynaeve fastened the proper image in her mind. She did not just imagine Moghedien leashed in the Adam. She knew Moghedien was leashed, as firmly as she knew her own name. The sense of shifting, of her skin trying to crawl, did not go away, though. "Stop that," she said sharply. The Adam did not move, but it seemed to tremble unseen. The thought of black wasp nettles lightly brushing the other woman from shoulders to knees. Moghedien shuddered, exhaled convulsively. "Stop it," I said, "or I'll do worse." The shifting ceased. Moghedien watched her warily, still clutching the silver collar around her neck with an air of being poised on her toes for flight. Brigida, the child who was, or had been, Brigida, stood eyeing them curiously. Nynaeve formed the image of her as a grown woman, concentrated. The little girl put her finger back in her mouth and began studying the toy bow. Nynaeve breathed angrily. It was hard changing what someone else was already maintaining, and on top of that, Moghedien had claimed she could make changes permanent, but what she could do, she could undo. Restore her. "If you release me, Nynaeve thought of nettles again, and not a light brush this time. Moghedien sucked air through clenched teeth, shook like a bedsheet in high wind. "That," Brigida said, "was the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me." Herself once more. She wore the short coat and wide trousers, but she had no bow or quiver. I was a child, but at the same time, what was me, really me, was just some fancy floating in the back of that child's mind, and I knew it. I knew I was just going to watch what happened, and play. Flipping her golden braid back over her shoulder, she gave Moghedien a hard look. "How did you get here?" Nynaeve asked. "I am grateful, you understand, but how?" Brigida gave Moghedien a final stony stare, then opened her coat to fish in the neck of her blouse, pulling up the twisted stone ring on a leather thong. Swan woke up, just for a moment, and not all the way, long enough to grumble about you snatching this from her. When you didn't wake right behind her, I knew something must be wrong, so I took the ring, and the last of what you mixed for Swan. There was hardly any left, only the dregs. It was enough to put me asleep. Tastes horrible, by the way. After that, it was as easy as finding feather dances in Chiyoda. Obviously.
As easy as finding feathers dance. As easy, obviously.
I slurred that a little too. As easy as finding feather dancers.
So, I'm guessing Chiyoda has a sailor population? Just guessing. Nynaeve is able to use the Adom on Moghedien, and Moghedien accepts it. Whereas Masana uses the Adom on Egwene, and Egwene dismisses it like it's nothing. And she says the mistake that Moghedien made was accepting it as real. And I think it's two parts, right? You have the fact that there's a battle of wills, right? Nynaeve tries to make the Adom manifest, Moghedien tries to make it disappear. But also, there's the whole fact that Nynaeve is able to apply pain through the Adom while it exists, and that's a second level. And Moghedien, if she'd been able to accept the pain, if she hadn't been a coward, could have fought through that and could have beat Nynaeve. But because Moghedien is a coward, because she gives in to her fear, she didn't have the ability to resist the Adom.
Oh, I like it. Yeah, I really like it. That's a big part of Egwene's character, too, that she may be small, but man, that spine is stiff. You cannot bend that girl.
No. And you sure as hell can't break her.
Yeah.
What do you think about Moghedien being able to make permanent changes in Tel'aran'rhiod? Do you think that's a thing, or do you think that's bluster?
I think it's more bluster than anything. I think maybe if she found, an untrained, weak-willed person, she could do something like that.
I mean, she does it to Brigitte, who is not untrained or weak-willed.
Oh, I mean permanently changing, so like changing their mind even when they're not dreaming, say. I assume that's what permanent meant.
I mean, her threat is that I will make you a child whenever you go to sleep, and whenever you come to Tel'aran'rhiod, you will be a child forever, and you can't change that.
No, I don't think it's unchangeable. I think that she could make it so that you can't change it, perhaps. You know what I mean? But that someone else could.
Right.
Like maybe if Nynaeve had run away when she thought of it for a moment and left Brigitte there, Brigitte probably would have been stuck.
When Moghedien says some things are stronger in dreams, she's talking about compulsion. And essentially what she's doing is there's that feedback loop of you use compulsion to change your mind, and your mind then changes you into what you think you are.
Yeah.
So by, there's that feedback loop of saying, hey, I'm going to compel you to think you are a child. And so whenever you appear in the world of dreams, you will be a child because your own mind thinks that's what you are.
Yeah, I think that's... Yeah. I don't see why that wouldn't be possible, only that I don't see how it could be permanent, and that someone else would be able to do something about it.
So imagine she compels you to think you're always a donkey.
Right.
The compulsion's permanent, so in the real world, you think you're a donkey.
Compulsion's permanent?
I mean, sure. Yeah, why isn't it? Right? She puts a weave on somebody.
Because it can be reversed, because it can be taken away.
Sure, yes. Assuming someone doesn't unweave the compulsion, right? Assuming someone doesn't remove the compulsion from your mind.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's like saying anything else is... I guess so. I mean, it's... Sure.
And assuming that Moghedien thinks she's powerful enough to weave compulsion that no one else can unweave without destroying your mind. Maybe.
I kind of doubt what she says is perfectly true to the letter.
Sure. I mean, I'm guessing that like in some extraneous edge circumstance, you could undo it. But for all intents and purposes, she could cast permanent compulsion over your mind that every time you came to Tel'aran'rhiod, you thought you were a child. And so that would make it permanent that whenever you came to Tel'aran'rhiod, you would manifest as a child. Or, in Super Chicken's case, as a chicken.
Yeah. I guess my knee-jerk response to that was, permanent is probably not true. But I guess, I mean, In the way tattoo is permanent, sure. Which is to say, not really. I mean, sort of. You know?
Which is to say, until somebody removes it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not going away on its own.
Yeah.
That's sort of what I think of when I say permanent. That, yes, you can take action to get rid of it, or someone else could take action to get rid of it, but... So at this point, basically, Nynaeve has Moghedien in Adam, and she has access to all of Moghedien's power.
I picked up halfway through a paragraph again, because I just thought that the narrative style was nice and effective here. Dread, creeping through the leash, like bone-chilling shrieks deep in Moghedien's mind. Maybe she did not know as much about Adam as Nynaeve thought. Maybe she believed Nynaeve could read her thoughts if she tried. Now, if you know of some threat to Rand, something ahead of Samael and the others, you tell me. Now. Words spilled from Moghedien's mouth, and her tongue flickered out to wet her lips continually. Althor means to go after Rahvin, today, this morning, because he thinks Rahvin killed Morghese. I don't know whether he did or not, but Althor believes it. But Rahvin never trusted Lanfear. He never trusted any of them. Why should he? He thought it all might be some trap set for him, so he has laid a trap of his own. He has set wards through Caemlyn, so if a man channels a spark, he will know. Althor will walk right into it. He almost certainly already has. I think he meant to leave Caerhien right after sunrise. I had no part of it. It was none of my doing. Nynaeve wanted to shut her up. The fear sweat glistening on the woman's face made her sick. But if she had to listen to that pleading voice, too, she started to channel, wondering whether she would be strong enough to hold Moghedien's tongue, then smiled. She was linked to Moghedien, and in control. Moghedien's eyes bulged, as she wove flows to stop her own mouth and tied them. Nynaeve added plugs for her ears, too, before turning to Brigitte. What do you think? Elaine's heart will break. She loves her mother. I know that. Nynaeve took a breath. I will cry with her, and mean every tear, but right now I must worry about Rand. I think she was telling the truth. I could almost feel it. She caught the silver leash just below her bracelet and shook it. Maybe it's this, and maybe it was imagination. What do you believe? That it's the truth. She was never very brave unless she clearly had the upper hand, or thought she could get it, and you certainly put the fear of light into her. Nynaeve grimaced. Brigitte's every word put another bubble of anger in her belly. She was never very brave, except when she clearly had the upper hand. That could describe herself. She had put the fear of the light into Moghedien. She had, and she meant every word when she said it. Boxing somebody's ears when they needed it was one thing. Threatening torture, wanting to torture, even Moghedien, was something else again. And here she was trying to avoid what she knew she had to do. Never very brave, except when she clearly had the upper hand. This time, the bubble of anger was seated by herself. We have to go to Caemlyn. I do, at least. With her. I may not be able to channel strongly enough to tear papers as I am, but with the Adam, I can use her strength. You won't be able to affect anything in the waking world from Teleran Riyadh, Brigitte said quietly. I know, but I have to do something. Brigitte threw her head back and laughed. Oh, Nynaeve, it is such an embarrassment being associated with such a coward as you. Abruptly her eyes widened in surprise. There wasn't much of your potion left. I think I am In mid-word, she was simply no longer there. Taking a deep breath, Nynaeve untied the flows around Moghedien, or made her do it. With the Adam, it was hard to tell which, really. She wished Brigitte was still there. Another pair of eyes. Someone who probably knew Teleran Riyadh better than she ever could. Someone who was brave. We are taking a trip, Moghedien, and if anything takes me by surprise, suffice it to say, anything happens to the one wearing this bracelet, happens to the one wearing the collar, only about tenfold. The sickly look on Moghedien's face said she believed, which was just as well, since it was true. Another deep breath, and Nynaeve began forming the image of one place in Caemlyn she knew well enough to remember, the royal palace, where Elaine had taken her. Rahvin must be there, but in the waking world, not the world of dreams. Still, she had to do something. Teleran Riyadh changed around her.
Oh, Nynaeve, it's such an embarrassment being associated with such a coward as you. Nynaeve insists she's a coward, and then takes one Forsaken captive and goes to confront another. Such a coward.
What a whiny little... Never getting anything done. Always waiting around. Every time she hears there's a trap, she runs the other way.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, a trap? Good. That's not cowardice. May not be intelligence, but that's different.
No, but like in her own mind, she thinks she's just as cowardly as Moghedien. She doesn't get the difference between them. And I hope I don't have to point it out again, that you can both be afraid, but the person that runs towards danger versus the person that runs away from it.
Yeah.
Like the person who runs towards it is brave. The person who runs away from it is a coward. You're both afraid.
Fear is good. I've gone on this rant on the podcast before, so I'll save it. But fear is good. You need it.
And this sets up one of the coolest scenes, I think, in the Wheel of Time, where Rahvin gets double-teamed in Tel'aran'rhiod by Nynaeve, Moghedien, and Rand, and it's just very cathartic. I still haven't watched Picard yet. I'll have to binge that at some point.
Worth it.
Is it over yet? Or is the first season wrapped up?
I was about to say I think it did, but I'm reeling that in now because I'm actually not sure. I have up to episode 10 on my computer.
Super Chicken is verifying that it did finish up.
It did? Okay, so there's only supposed to be 10 episodes?
Yeah.
I've just been checking every... I think it's released on Thursday nights. So I check every Friday or whatever. Okay, well, that makes sense because the episode 10 was kind of a big deal plot-wise.
Cool. I might have to see if I can... Can you do a trial period on CBS All Access if you haven't signed up yet?
Ooh.
I might have to try it free and see if I can binge it all.
I don't know. And that's all I'll say.
Fair enough.
Oh, Aradia, are you making masks?
Yes, Aradia is working hard to make a bunch of masks for her family and friends. I don't know about friends, but at least family.
Hey, can I bother you later? Or did you use the pattern that they put in the New York Times recently? Because Julia wanted to do it. And she has a nice sewing machine and knows what she's doing. I was thinking of sacrificing one of my flannel shirts so Julia could make me a mask out of it. And then I can have a flannel mask.
Flannel's good.
Yeah, I see people out there now with all kinds of silly designs.
I mean, if we're gonna wear masks, wear a mask. Like it, don't steal the N95 from hospitals, but it, what we're seeing is there is evidence that having something over your face will prevent you from spreading.
To the farmer's market today, and about half the people at the market when I went out today, because this is the only time I leave the house really, is I'm either going for a walk or walking to the market, and it's usually I make them one event. Go for a long walk, stop at the market, go home. Oh, but the whole point was, like, half the people were wearing something today. Like, people were wearing, like, winter scarves and also bandanas. Some people had homemade masks.
Well, I mean, the recommendations changed, right?
Did the government officially recommend that we all wear masks now? Did that happen?
Yes.
I think I read a headline this morning that was like, the government probably will, or something like that. I'm ready. To be totally honest, just looked up what the difference between a rebreather and a respirator are. I did not know. I can't say that I actually knew that technology existed, which is pretty cool. A rebreather absorbs the carbon dioxide, and then so that you can breathe the air that you wasted, essentially. It makes a respirator more efficient. or a more efficient version of a type of respirator. Anyway.
Kind of sounds like something they have on the spaceships. Yeah, enclosed scuba dive, basically.
Yeah. I did not know that technology existed. That's pretty cool.
Because it's not that hard to provide oxygen. You only need a small tank to get O2. The problem is the
sorting it.
CO2.
Sorting out the waste.
You produce a bunch of CO2. Yeah.
I just kind of wondered what would happen. Anyway. Before I get totally sidetracked.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?